I was arranging flowers on my dining room table when the mail fell through the slot. The sound of envelopes hitting the hardwood floor was ordinary enough, but something about that Saturday morning felt different. Maybe it was the weight of silence in the house, or maybe it was the special occasion that had been happening around me for weeks without my knowledge. I picked up the stack and flipped through the usual bills and advertisements, stopping cold when I saw the cream-colored envelope with elegant calligraphy. My name wasn't on it. It read simply, Mr. and Mrs. James Mitchell. Not Helen Mitchell. Not Mr. and Mrs. James and Helen Mitchell. Just him. Just my husband of 32 years reduced to a single Mr. While I was compressed into a possessive pronoun that made me feel like property rather than a person. My hand started shaking as I opened it. Inside was an invitation to the wedding of my niece, my brother's daughter Rebecca, who I'd watched grow from a colicky newborn to a beautiful woman. I'd attended her high school graduation, her college ceremony, helped her pick out her first apartment. I'd been there for all of it. And now, for the most important day of her life, the day she was marrying the love of her life, I wasn't invited. Not really. The words on the invitation blurred as my eyes welled up. The wedding was in 4 days. The rehearsal dinner was tomorrow night. Everyone would be there. My entire family, my brother David with his wife Patricia, my sister-in-law Susan with her pretentious lawyer husband, all the cousins and their spouses. But not Helen. Never Helen, apparently. I sat down hard on the couch, the invitation still in my trembling hands. James came in from his morning golf game. His polo shirt stuck to his chest with sweat, that satisfied look he always had when he'd played well. He stopped short when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately reaching for the envelope. I handed it to him without speaking. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up with a mixture of shock and pain that I didn't even have the right vocabulary to describe. He read it twice, as if the words might change on a second viewing. His jaw clenched. "Helen, you knew," I said. It wasn't a question. I could see it written all over his face. "You knew about this. How long?" 3 weeks, he admitted quietly. "David called me. He said Patricia was being difficult about the guest list and so you just accepted it? You just accepted that your wife of 32 years wouldn't be invited to your niece's wedding." He sat down beside me, looking genuinely troubled. "I was going to tell you. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. Patricia has always been jealous of you. You know that." Rebecca got nervous and didn't want to upset her mother more by including you when Patricia specifically said. When Patricia specifically said what? That she couldn't bear to see me there? That I'd somehow ruin her perfect day with my mere presence. This is what I didn't understand about my relationship with my family, especially my sister-in-law Patricia. For 32 years I had shown up. I had been kind, generous, thoughtful. I had spent countless holidays in that house, had helped Patricia plan her own daughter's nursery, had been there when Rebecca was born at 2 in the morning because David called me in a panic. I had given gifts, sent cards, remembered birthdays, listened to Patricia complain about her marriage, her in-laws, her anxiety about Rebecca's future. I had been a good sister-in-law. More than good. I had been genuinely, authentically invested in this family. But to Patricia, I had always been an outsider. Something about me had threatened her from the moment I married David. Maybe it was that she saw David and me as close, that he confided in me, that he chose to spend time with me. Or maybe she was just one of those people who could never fully accept anyone into her carefully controlled circle. Whatever it was, her resentment had simmered for 3 decades like a low boil. And now it had finally boiled over completely. The irony was cutting. I had always been too much of a people-pleaser, too focused on managing everyone else's comfort and feelings. I had let myself become smaller and smaller to accommodate Patricia's jealousy, to avoid making family dinners awkward, to preserve some semblance of peace. And this was how I was repaid. With an invitation that said, in no uncertain terms, that I wasn't family. Not really. I was just a wife. Just an appendage of a man. Just someone who could be cast aside when it was inconvenient. James was still talking, trying to explain, trying to make it right, but I wasn't really hearing him anymore. I was thinking about Rebecca. I was thinking about how she had asked me to help her choose her bridesmaids' dresses. How she had called me in tears when her high school boyfriend broke her heart. How I had spent an entire Saturday teaching her to make my famous wedding cookies. the ones I'd been perfecting for decades. I had contributed to this day in ways that Patricia could never erase, and yet she had tried. She had tried to erase me completely. Something hardened in my chest then. Something that had been soft and accommodating for 32 years suddenly turned to steel. I looked at my husband, this man I loved but who had clearly chosen to keep his peace with my brother over defending me, and I made a decision. I'm going to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow, I said quietly. Helen, no. That will cause such a scene. I don't care. I'm going. Rebecca deserves to know that I care about her, that I'm proud of her, that I support her marriage. And the rest of them deserve to look in my face and acknowledge what they've done. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but he must have seen something in my expression that told him not to bother. James could be many things, but he wasn't a fool. He recognized the tone I used when my mind was made up. That night I barely slept. I lay in the dark, replaying every single interaction I'd ever had with Patricia, every moment where I had bent myself to avoid her jealousy, every time I had made myself smaller to make room for her to feel bigger. The memories played like a film reel that I couldn't turn off. Christmas morning in that house, always sitting on the periphery while Patricia orchestrated every detail of the celebration. Easter dinners where she found fault with every dish I brought, every contribution I made. Birthday parties where she managed who sat next to Rebecca, who got to talk to her, who had a place in her life. And I had tolerated it all. I had smiled through it. I had told myself that this was just how some people were, that her behavior wasn't my responsibility to fix, that the high road was the right road. But the high road had led me here, to an invitation that said I didn't matter, to a family event I was excluded from, to a moment where I finally understood that no amount of kindness, no amount of accommodation, no amount of showing up for other people would ever be enough to earn a place in Patricia's world. The next morning, I got up and went to my closet. If I was going to crash a rehearsal dinner, I was going to look absolutely stunning. I wasn't going to look hurt. I wasn't going to look vulnerable or pathetic or like a woman who was desperately trying to keep her place in a family that didn't want her. I was going to look like exactly what I was, a woman with value, with presence, with a right to be there. I chose a deep emerald silk dress that I'd bought for a charity gala 2 years ago. It was sophisticated and elegant, with a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt that made me feel like myself. Confident, graceful, and completely self-assured. My hair I had styled in soft waves, and my makeup was perfect, not overdone but polished and professional. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. That woman wasn't apologizing for existing. That woman wasn't diminishing herself to make room for someone else's insecurity. That woman had dignity, and she was about to remind everyone exactly who she was. James watched me get dressed with a mixture of concern and what might have been reluctant admiration. You look beautiful, he said quietly. But Helen, please, think about this. Think about what might happen. They might ask you to leave. They might make it ugly. I turned to face him and I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, perhaps, that he had failed me. That in the moment it had mattered most. He had chosen comfort over standing beside his wife. Then let them make it ugly, I said. I've spent 32 years being pretty and accommodating and understanding about their jealousy and their insecurity. I've shrunk myself down to almost nothing to give them space to be comfortable. I'm done. Today, they're going to see what it costs them when they decide that I'm not worth inviting to the table. The drive to the country club where the rehearsal dinner was being held took 20 minutes. I had attended Rebecca's last few birthday parties there, had eaten lunch at that club with other family members, had even helped Patricia plan her anniversary dinner there 2 years ago. So I knew exactly where the private dining room was. I knew the staff, knew the layout, knew that I could walk in like I belonged there. Because I did belong there. My heart was pounding as I pulled into the parking lot. I could see my family's cars lined up. David's Mercedes, Patricia's Range Rover, Susan's pretentious Porsche. I could see cars I didn't recognize, which meant Rebecca's fiancé's family was there too. This was going to be worse than just facing my own family. This was going to be a public humiliation of Patricia's decision, right in front of the people who would marry into her family. Part of me knew I should feel nervous. Part of me should have been questioning whether this was a good idea. But I was past that now. I was past wondering whether I was making the right choice. I was past considering everyone else's comfort above my own. I was past being Helen Mitchell, the nice wife, the accommodating sister-in-law, the woman who showed up and didn't demand anything in return. I stepped out of my car, took a deep breath, adjusted my dress, and walked toward the entrance of the country club. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked through the lobby. The staff member at the entrance knew me and smiled in recognition. I smiled back, gave him a small wave, and continued toward the private dining room. The murmur of voices and the clink of glasses told me they were already in full celebration. I paused for just a moment outside the closed door, gathering myself, preparing for what was about to happen. This moment would change something. I could feel it. The trajectory of my relationship with my family was about to shift permanently, and there was no undoing it. But I was finally ready for that shift. I was finally ready to stop being small. I opened the door and walked into the room like I had every right to be there. Because I did. The room was decorated beautifully. Centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath, white linens, fresh flowers everywhere. Rebecca was seated at the head of the table next to her fiancé, Michael, and she looked absolutely radiant in a pale pink dress. For a moment I forgot about Patricia. I forgot about the pain of being excluded. I just saw my niece, the girl I had helped raise in so many little ways, and my heart felt like it might burst with love for her. David saw me first. His fork clattered against his plate, and his eyes went wide. Then Patricia turned, and I watched her face go through a spectacular progression of emotions. Shock, anger, humiliation. Her mouth actually fell open. "Helen," she said, and my name in her mouth sounded like a curse. "What are you doing here?" Every eye in the room turned toward me. Michael's parents looked confused. Rebecca's face went pale. David was frantically looking back and forth between Patricia and me, clearly weighing which woman he needed to manage in this moment. Which of us he needed to smooth over. The familiar dynamic was already settling into place. I was the problem that needed to be solved, the disruption that needed to be managed. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I walked toward Rebecca, completely ignoring Patricia's question. Rebecca stood up, clearly uncertain whether she should be happy or terrified to see me. I pulled her into a hug, genuine and warm, and I felt her relax into it. "I wanted to see you before tomorrow," I said, loud enough that everyone in the room could hear me. "I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. How honored I am to have known you your entire life. How much I love you, Rebecca. And how much I celebrate your marriage." Rebecca hugged me tighter, and I felt her trembling. "Aunt Helen, she started, but her voice broke. Over her shoulder, I met Patricia's eyes. I held them deliberately, and I saw the exact moment when she understood what was happening. I wasn't playing her game. I wasn't sinking away in shame. I wasn't accepting the role she'd cast me in. "I know I wasn't invited," I continued, still speaking to the room, still holding Patricia's gaze. "But I'm here anyway. Because family doesn't demand invitations. Family shows up for the people they love, regardless of whether they're wanted or not." The implication hung in the air because I was family. Because I loved Rebecca. Because unlike some people in this room, I wouldn't let my own insecurity and jealousy prevent me from being present for someone else's joy. Patricia stood up abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "This is completely inappropriate. James, control your wife. She was not invited here. She needs to leave immediately." I turned away from Rebecca and walked toward Patricia with purpose. I had spent so much of my life trying not to directly confront this woman, trying to smooth things over, trying to make peace. But there was no peace to be made with someone who could look at 32 years of relationship and decide that your presence was unwelcome because of her own insecurity. "You know what's inappropriate?" I said, my voice steady and calm. "Excluding your sister-in-law from your daughter's wedding because you're jealous. Telling your daughter that she can't have a healthy relationship with her aunt because it threatens your fragile ego. Treating a family member like they're invisible for 3 decades, and then acting shocked when they refuse to disappear. How dare you speak to me that way?" Patricia sputtered, her face turning red. "How dare I?" I laughed, and it sounded almost unfamiliar to my own ears. "I dare because I have nothing left to lose with you. I've already been rejected. I've already been deemed not good enough to sit at your table. So what, exactly, are you going to do to punish me now?" David stood up. "Helen, come on. Let's not do this here." I turned to my brother. This man I loved despite everything, and I felt a surge of sadness. Do you remember when Rebecca was born? I asked. Do you remember calling me at 2 in the morning in a panic, because she wasn't sleeping and Patricia was exhausted? Do you remember how I drove across the city to help you? How I helped you figure out how to settle a colicky baby, while you paced the floors? Do you remember being grateful then? His face crumpled slightly and he looked away. I do, I continued. I remember all of it. I remember being there. And I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, I was becoming a real part of this family. Not just a wife but a sister. An aunt. A person who mattered in Rebecca's life. I turned back to Rebecca, and I could see she had tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry I came uninvited, sweetheart. I didn't come to cause problems or to hurt anyone. I came because I love you, and I wanted you to know that tomorrow when you walk down the aisle, I'll be in that church cheering for you, believing in you, celebrating the beautiful woman you've become. Nothing Patricia does or says can change that. She's not invited to the wedding either, Patricia announced loudly, as if we hadn't already guessed. I've made that very clear. The room went silent. Michael's mother looked horrified. Michael looked furious. I saw my brother put his head in his hands, and then Rebecca spoke. Her voice was soft but steady, and there was something different in it. Something that sounded like she was claiming her own power for the first time in her life. I invited her, Rebecca said. Mom, I asked her to the wedding and you told me no. You said if I invited Aunt Helen you wouldn't come. You said she was trouble. You said she was only trying to interfere in my life and cause problems. Patricia's face went white. Rebecca, that's not. It is, Rebecca interrupted. It's exactly what you said. And I was scared enough of losing you that I went along with it. But I've been thinking about it all week, and Aunt Helen is right. I'm an adult. My wedding should include the people I love. And I love my Aunt Helen. I've always loved her. Rebecca looked at me with those bright, tear-filled eyes and she said, I want you at my wedding, Aunt Helen. I want you there tomorrow. The room erupted. Patricia started sputtering that she couldn't control her daughter, that she was being ungrateful, that she couldn't possibly attend if that's how it was going to be. Michael told his mother that he thought Patricia was being unreasonable, and that he absolutely thought I should be there. David looked torn between his wife and his daughter and his sister, the impossible position he'd been put in by the women in his life. But I wasn't paying attention to any of that anymore. I was focused on Rebecca, on the young woman who was choosing to stand up for what she believed in, who was choosing to honor the relationship that mattered to her despite her mother's ultimatum. I was focused on the moment when she realized she had the right to make that choice, the power to include or exclude people from her own life based on love rather than obligation. I squeezed her hand gently. Are you sure? I asked. Because if you want me there, I will be there with bells on. But only if it's truly what you want. It is, she said, and then she hugged me tightly, burying her face in my shoulder, and for the first time in days I felt like maybe, just maybe, something right was happening. The rehearsal dinner dissolved into chaos after that. Patricia stood up and announced that she was leaving, that she couldn't be part of a family that treated her so disrespectfully. She left in a cloud of righteous indignation, her daughter's boyfriend's family looking on in stunned silence. David looked like he might follow her, but Rebecca put her hand on his shoulder and gave him a look that clearly said, Don't you dare. I stood in that dining room, still in my emerald dress, and felt the weight of everything that had been building toward this moment finally lift slightly. Not completely. There would be consequences, there would be fallout, there would be family members who sided with Patricia and made things difficult for years to come. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed. James found me afterward and wrapped his arm around me, pulling me away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the country club. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry for not standing up for you from the beginning. I'm sorry for letting Patricia dictate the terms. I'm sorry for being a coward. I looked at my husband of 32 years, and I saw genuine remorse in his face. I also saw something else, respect. He was looking at me like he was seeing me fully for the first time in a long time. Like he was recognizing that the quiet, accommodating woman he'd been married to all these years had a spine, had boundaries, had a value that couldn't be diminished by other people's jealousy. From now on, I said carefully, you choose me. Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. All the time. You choose your wife. You choose to stand beside me. Because if you don't, then we're going to have problems that are bigger than what just happened tonight. He nodded and he didn't try to argue or negotiate. He simply accepted that his wife had drawn a line, and he would need to decide which side he was standing on. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mixture of anxiety and exhilaration running through my veins. The wedding was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By the time it started, everyone in the family would have heard what happened at the rehearsal dinner. Patricia would have called Susan and told her version of events. David would have fielded calls from other family members. The narrative would have been shaped and reshaped, and I had no control over what that narrative would be. But I also found that I didn't care as much as I thought I would. I had spent 32 years caring about what people thought of me, what stories they told about me, what my role in the family narrative was supposed to be. And that caring had diminished me. It had made me smaller. It had allowed Patricia to define me as someone who could be excluded, rejected, and dismissed. I was done with that. I spent the morning getting ready, and it felt different from usual. Usually when I was preparing for a formal event, my thoughts were about making sure I looked appropriate, that I wouldn't stand out too much or draw too much attention. This time, I dressed knowing that I would be noticed. I dressed knowing that people would talk about what I was wearing, how I looked, what I was doing there. And for the first time, I didn't try to make myself smaller to minimize their attention. I chose a jewel blue dress with a subtle shimmer that caught the light beautifully. Elegant jewelry. Perfect hair and makeup. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was ready to claim her rightful place in her own family, regardless of whether everyone was happy about it. Rebecca had texted me that morning. "Mom says she might not come," the text read. "But I want you to know that I'm glad you're coming. Regardless of what she does, I'm glad." I texted back, "I'll see you at the altar. I'm so proud of you." The church was beautiful, decorated in white and pale pink, with flowers lining every pew. I arrived early, before the ceremony started, and I found a seat in the third row, across the aisle from where Patricia would presumably sit with her family, if she showed up at all. As people filtered in, I saw the reactions. Some family members smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like I'd never been excluded at all. Some looked away uncomfortably. Some looked at me with thinly veiled hostility. I held my head up and simply acknowledged them, neither apologizing for my presence nor seeking their approval. Then Patricia arrived. She walked in with David and her face was like stone. She sat down, turned away from me, and fixed her eyes on the altar like it might spontaneously combust if she stopped staring at it. I felt a flicker of something, not quite satisfaction but maybe vindication. She had shown up. Despite everything, despite threatening to boycott her daughter's wedding if I was included, she had shown up. Rebecca looked stunning as she walked down the aisle in her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, looking like a vision of joy and hope and anticipation. When she saw me in the crowd, she smiled, and that smile said everything. It said that she knew I was there, that I mattered, that my presence meant something to her on this day. The ceremony was beautiful. The couple exchanged vows that made me cry, vows about choosing each other every single day, vows about building a life together despite obstacles and challenges. And I sat there thinking about my own marriage, about James, about what it meant to choose someone fully and completely. At the reception, things were more complex. I was allowed to attend because Rebecca had invited me, but I was clearly not welcomed by Patricia and her circle. I saw women I'd known for decades actively avoid me. I overheard conversations that stopped abruptly when I walked by. But I also saw something else. I saw Rebecca introduce me to Michael's family as her beloved aunt, the woman who had been there for her entire life. I saw her light up when she talked about memories we shared. I saw her make a point to come find me during the reception and sit with me, showing me pictures of her honeymoon plans, telling me stories, acting like it was the most natural thing in the world that I be there. I saw David approach me while Patricia was occupied with other guests. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for all of it. For not defending you. For letting Patricia make these decisions. For being too much of a coward to stand up for my sister when it mattered." "I'm not angry," I told him, and I meant it. I was sad, disappointed, and I'd lost some respect for him, but anger required energy I was no longer willing to spend on my brother. But going forward, things are going to be different. I'm going to have a relationship with Rebecca that doesn't go through Patricia's gatekeeping. And if you want to maintain a relationship with me, you're going to have to decide that I'm worth defending." He nodded, and I could see the weight of that realization settling on him. He had a choice to make, and the choice wasn't going to be easy. The week after the wedding, I received a formal letter from Patricia. It was typed on her personal stationery, professional and cold. In it, she outlined her concerns about how I was overstepping boundaries and creating conflict within the family. She suggested that going forward, family gatherings would need to be planned more carefully to ensure everyone's comfort and boundaries were respected. She also mentioned that David had agreed with her assessment, though I seriously doubted that was entirely true. I read the letter 3 times and then I filed it away. I didn't respond to it. I didn't argue with it. I simply acknowledged that Patricia had drawn her line, and I had drawn mine, and we were now operating on opposite sides of that line. What happened instead was that I shifted my relationship with the family. I stopped trying to manage Patricia's feelings or accommodate her jealousy. I made plans with Rebecca that didn't include her mother. I invited David for lunches where I didn't try to moderate the conversation or avoid topics that might make Patricia uncomfortable. I gave myself permission to have relationships with family members that existed independently of Patricia's approval or disapproval. Did it cost me something? Yes. I lost the relationship I thought I had with my brother, at least temporarily. I became the person who showed up uninvited, who caused a scene, who refused to accept boundaries. I became the family villain in Patricia's narrative. And there were family members who chose to believe that narrative rather than see the nuance of what had actually happened. But I also gained something. I gained my dignity back. I gained the knowledge that I didn't need Patricia's approval to be valuable to Rebecca. I gained the understanding that showing up for the people I loved, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was not welcomed by everyone in the room, was the right thing to do. I gained the recognition from my niece that I mattered, that I had mattered all along, and that our relationship was worth fighting for. In the months that followed, Rebecca texted me regularly. She sent me pictures from her honeymoon. She asked for my advice about buying a house. She called me when she had bad days. She acknowledged that what I had done, showing up at that rehearsal dinner uninvited, had actually freed her to make her own choices about who belonged in her life. I realized that night, she told me during one of our coffee dates, that I'd been letting Mom make all my decisions. I'd been letting her fear and jealousy dictate my relationships. Seeing you walk into that room knowing you weren't invited, knowing it would upset her, and doing it anyway because you loved me, that showed me that I could do that too. I could love people and choose people regardless of whether Mom approved. That conversation meant more to me than Patricia could ever know. That was the real victory. Not humiliating her at a rehearsal dinner, not forcing my way into a family event I wasn't invited to, but showing my niece that she had choices, that she had power over her own relationships and her own life. James and I also shifted in our marriage. He became more protective of me, more willing to stand up to family members who overstepped. He actually confronted his brother about Patricia's behavior, something he never would have done before. He made it clear that I was not negotiable, that I was not going to be treated as a non-entity in exchange for maintaining peace. "I loved you before," he told me one night, "but I didn't respect you enough. I see that now. I took for granted that you would always accommodate, always bend, always be there. I let other people define your value instead of fighting for it myself. I'm not going to do that anymore." And he kept his word. When Patricia sent Christmas cards with just his name on them the following year, he sent them back with a note explaining that if his wife's name wasn't on the card, he wouldn't be accepting it. When family gatherings were planned in ways that excluded me, he declined to attend. When his brother started suggesting that perhaps I should let things cool off with Rebecca, he shut it down immediately. As for Patricia, she never really apologized. She eventually acknowledged that she had been unreasonable, which was as close to an apology as I was ever going to get. But her tone had shifted. She had realized, I think, that her jealousy had a cost. She had realized that by trying to control her daughter's relationships, she had actually damaged them. She had realized that by pushing me away, she had pushed Rebecca toward me. The following year, Rebecca asked me to be a godmother to her first child. Patricia made a comment about it being an unusual choice, but she made it quietly to herself. Because she had learned that I was not someone she could diminish or dismiss anymore. She had learned that there were consequences to treating people the way she had treated me. And me? I had learned that I had been living according to someone else's rules all my life. I had accepted the role that Patricia had assigned to me. The outsider, the appendage, the person who needed to manage everyone's feelings except her own. And when I finally rejected that role, when I finally walked into that rehearsal dinner uninvited and claimed my rightful place, something fundamental changed. I learned that I didn't need permission to matter. I didn't need an invitation to be present for people I loved. I didn't need to be liked by everyone to have value. I learned that dignity isn't something that other people can take from you. You either claim it for yourself or you surrender it, and I was done surrendering. The irony is that by putting myself first, by drawing boundaries, by refusing to be diminished, I actually became more valued in my family. Rebecca wanted to spend time with me. David came to respect me. Even James loved me differently, with admiration, with respect, with recognition that his wife was a full person with her own needs and desires, not just a supporting character in his life. That invitation, addressed only to Mr. and Mrs. James Mitchell, had been a pain that I will never fully recover from. But it was also a gift in a strange way. It was the permission I needed to finally stop shrinking myself for other people's comfort. It was the catalyst that forced me to examine my own worth and decide that I wasn't going to let anyone else be the arbiter of it. And as I look back on that moment, standing in the doorway of that rehearsal dinner, about to walk uninvited into a room full of people who had decided I didn't belong, I realized that was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I reclaimed myself. Because family bonds cannot be shredded so easily. And sometimes the greatest act of love is showing up anyway, invited or not, to remind the people you love exactly what they would lose if they let you go.